Nice to see you all. Welcome. So nice to see so many of you here. I think people are still trickling in, but I will start with a very brief info. So my name is Tulin. I am the artistic director of SAVAC. And for those of you who don't know SAVAC, we have been working out of Toronto for more than 25 years. We are an artist-run center, and we support and present the works of racialized and marginalized artists. Lately, we have been focusing a lot of our efforts on developing deeper relationships with artists and their working methodologies in a number of different ways, including through immersive and experiential learning. So today, we're really excited to launch Missed Connections, which Hiba Ali's project, the Black Indian Ocean series, is part of. Missed Connections is our new digital platform that presents pedagogical and research opportunities for our community and the artists that we work with across geographies and generations. The program focuses on interdisciplinary artistic practice and the act of bringing closer together different modes of thinking, doing, and being. In addition to Hiba, we are working with artists Annie Wong, Serena Lee, Aman Sandhu, and Parastu Anushahpur, whose explorations will unfold under this platform throughout 2021. You can read more about Missed Connections on our website, which we'll also post the link to our website in the chat for those of you who don't know. A critical element of Missed Connections is to create a generative and warm learning space in the digital sphere. So, last year we were going to launch a different kind of experiential learning program that was going to be based in real life. Lots of things changed, and Missed Connections came out of it, and it's going to be it's all going to take place online for now. But we've developed a series or a simple set of propositions as an invitation to think and work together on how we can create such a space online. So my colleague Sophie, who's here with us, she's going to paste the link to that document in the chat as well. And obviously it's a very broad set of propositions, and it's quite an informal document. Not everything in there applies necessarily to a session like today's, but I'm curious to see what you think, and I hope you'll find it useful. So before I pass on the mic to Hiba, I'd like to introduce her to you. Hiba Ali is a digital artist, educator, scholar, DJ, experimental music producer, and curator based across Chicago, Illinois, Austin, Texas, and Toronto, Ontario. Their performances and videos concern surveillance, women of color, and labor. She studies geographies of East African, South Asian, and Arab communities across the Indian Ocean through music, cloth, and rituals. They conduct reading groups addressing digital media and workshops with open source technologies. She's a Ph.D. candidate in cultural studies at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. They are an assistant professor of art, new media, artist/feminist art discourse, College of Design, Art, and Technology at the University of Oregon in Eugene. She has presented their work in Chicago, Stockholm, Vienna, Berlin, Toronto, New York, Istanbul, Sao Paulo, Detroit, Windsor, Dubai, Austin, Vancouver, and Portland. They've written for C Magazine, The Scene Magazine, New City, Chicago, Art Dubai, The State, BAM Magazine, Zora Medium, RTV Magazine, and Topical Cream Magazine. So welcome, Hiba, and thank you so much for all your work and for being part of Missed Connections. And welcome to Beheroze and Jazmin, who are going to be joining us today. Hiba will introduce them to you. And finally, just again, thank you all for attending. And I want to also thank and point out my colleagues, Indu Vashist and Sophie Sabet, who are with me at SAVAC. Thank you so much for all your work and support. And yeah, enjoy the event, and we'll see you again after the discussion.
Thank you, Tolene, for the lovely introduction to both myself and the Missed Connections series. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the series, and then we'll share Beheroze Shroff and Jazmin Graves, who have so generously joined me today for the first inaugural event. So the Black Indian Ocean series visualizes the histories and futures of African descent communities in the Indian Ocean region through curated film screenings and generative pedagogy. As you probably noted with this event, that there was a set of 2 readings assigned in as part of the events discourse that you will listen if you will listen in here. But if you have not read them, fret not. We will be including them as part of our discussion as well. With each event, there'll be supplementary pedagogic material, such as readings, videos, and audio. There is an archive of the series being generated on Substack, so we'll paste that link as well, where the next screening will be, information regarding the next screening and will be shared as well. And just in general, if there's questions that come up while you're watching Beheroze Shroff's work, please put them in the chat and we will attend to them after we have finished watching Voices of the Sidis. We'll go ahead and share Beheroze Shroff's bio now. Beheroze Shroff is a documentary filmmaker and longtime scholar of the Sidis. Shroff teaches in the Department of Asian American Studies at the University of California, Irvine. Born in Bombay, Shroff obtained her master's in English literature from the University of Bombay and went to obtain an MFA, Master of Fine Arts degree in film production at the University of California, Los Angeles. She has made 5 documentaries on contemporary African-descended Sidis of Gujarat, their cultural and spiritual practices. Shroff was introduced to the spiritual legacy of the Sidis of Gujarat and their ancestral saint Baba Gaur from the age of 7 by her parents, who have become devotees of Sidi Saint Baba Gaur. Shroff has published widely in several journals and anthologies on different aspects of contemporary Sidi life in Gujarat, India. Most recently, in 2020, Shroff has co-edited a 3-volume publication titled Afro-South Asia and the Global African Diaspora, which explores the ways in which African and people of African descent have shaped and been shaped by the histories, cultures, and societies of South Asia. Her documentaries have been shown at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, School of Oriental and African Studies in London, Commonwealth Institute, London, the Schomburg Library, and Museum of Black Culture in New York, the Pan-African Film Festivals in Los Angeles, and at the Nairobi and Zanzibar International Arts, Music, and Film Festivals, amongst others. Next, I would like to include Jazmin Graves' bio. Jazmin Graves, she, her, is a 3rd grade Marshall Fellow in the African and African American Studies program at Dartmouth College and a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. Her dissertation, Songs to the African Saints of India, studies the African diaspora in Western India through a lens of Afro-Indian devotional music and rituals. A junior research fellowship from the American Institute of Indian Studies supported her ethnographic and archival research in India from 2018 to 2019. In 2018, Jazmin was named one of the MyPad Global Top 100 Most Influential People of African Descent under 40. And so with that, I will go ahead and start the screening. And so this is Beheroze Shroff's Voice of the Sidis compilation.
બેકગ્રાઉન્ડ તરીકે પહેલાં તો મને ગૌરવ થયું કે ભાઈ અહીંયા આગળ મને જોબ મળી અને હું જોબ જાઉં છું. ત્યાં પણ એ લોકોને પહેલાં આશ્ચર્ય થયો. પહેલાં હું બેંકમાં ગઈ તો બધા એમ લાગ્યું કે અહીંથી હું નથી આવી, હું બહારની છું. એટલે પહેલાં કોઈ મારી સાથે ગુજરાતીમાં વાત પણ નહોતા કરતા. એ લોકોને એવું થયું કે બહારથી કોઈ આવેલા છે. એટલે 1-2 દિવસ કદાચ હશે. પહેલાં એવું પણ લાગ્યું કે આ ડિપોઝિટ માટે આવેલા છે. તો પહેલાં ફોરેન એક્સચેન્જમાં મોકલી દીધી કે આ ડિપોઝિટ માટે આવ્યા હશે. પછી કીધું નહીં ભાઈ હું અહીંયા જોબ જ કરું છું. વેસ્ટર્ન ક્લોઝ તો પહેલેથી જ પહેરું છું. નાનપણથી જ તે પોર્સોલામાં હતા એટલે વેસ્ટર્ન વધારે છે. પણ અમારા જ્યારે કાસ્ટમાં જઈએ ત્યારે થોડું જુદું લાગે એ લોકોને કે આવું ન હોવું જોઈએ કે ન પહેરવું જોઈએ. પણ જરા હું પહેલેથી પહેરવાની આદત રહીને ઘરમાં પહેરું છું એટલે કોઈ પ્રોબ્લેમ નથી. પણ એના ઉપરથી મને આ ડ્રેસના ઉપરથી જ બધા એવું માને છે કે હું ગુજરાતી નથી.
કેટલી વાર તો પોલીસવાળા લોકો બી પૂછે કે કાં से आए तो अरे फिर मराठी में बोली बच्चे हमें इकडे ही रहते हैं बॉम्बे. અમે બોમ્બેમાં જ રહે છે.
અમે હિન્દુસ્તાન બી છીએ, આફ્રિકા બી છીએ. એવું હિન્દુસ્તાન વાળા અમને આફ્રિકન કે ને અમને અમે કે અમે હિન્દુસ્તાની છીએ. અમારા રિવાજ જે છે એ તો અમારા હિન્દુસ્તાની જ છે ને, આફ્રિકાના નથી ને. અહીંયા અમારા જેટલા બી રિવાજ છે, રિલેટિવ છે, બધા હિન્દુસ્તાનમાં જ છે. આફ્રિકાની સાથે કોઈ કન્સર્ન નહીં અમારે. હવે પ્રોગ્રામમાં લઈ જાય છે અહીંયાથી. બીજું કે અમે લોકો આ કાંઈ મોરપીછા છે, ડ્રેસ છે, એ બધું અમે કંઈ પહેરતા, અમારી એ સાંસ્કૃતિક તો એ તો પહેલાં અમારા ઓફિસર જે આવ્યા એમણે એ બધી સંસ્કૃતિ બતાવી. બાકી અમે તો અમારા સાદા આ જ યુનિફોર્મમાં અમે તો પ્રોગ્રામ અમારું આપતા હતા. તો દાદાની સેવા કરતા હતા. પણ આ લોકો અમને લઈ ગયા કે ચાલો તમે બહાર પ્રોગ્રામ કરો, તમને અમને રોજી ચાલુ કરી દઈએ. એમ કરીને એ લોકો અમને તો અમે પસંદ કર્યું આ મોરપીછાનું ડ્રેસ.
ये यानी कि जब से गोरी सुल्तान आए हैं इस बाजे को लेकर हमको दिया है, तो हमारे बाप दादा बजाते बजाते आज हम बजाते हैं, कल उठ के हमारे बच्चे भी बजाएंगे. क्यों नहीं सिखाना ही पड़े, क्योंकि ये तो हमारा दिली जान का बाजा है, बिलाली बाजा है.
આજે છે આપણે દૂધી નથી હોતી, શાક કરી છે એટલે મોટી છે, પછી ઘરડી થઈ જાય, સુકાય તો સુકાવીને આની કટિંગ કરીને આ બનાવી લીધું, સમજી ગયા. પછી આ માઈ મિશ્રાનું બાજુ છે, માઈ સાહેબ માઈ મિશ્રા એમનું આ બાજુ છે, એની સાથે હોવું જોઈએ. ને આ છે આ તાંત છે બકરાની. તારે એ તાંત પહેલાં અમારા આકા બિલાલ હુજુર સલ્લલ્લાહુ અલૈહિ વસલ્લમના બહુ માનતા એક એ હતા સાહબી હજરત બિલાલ, એટલે એમના જો વંશજોમાંથી એમની જો એમાંથી અમે છીએ. રંગ કાળો, મોટા મોટા, એમને હાથની એમની રગ કાઢીને એની આ રસ્સી બનાવીને આને વગાડેલું છે. એનું નામ મલુંગો.
ચાદર મઝાર પર બાબા ગોર, બાબા અબ્બાસ, મૈસાબમાં. અહીંયા તો બધા જ આવે, હિન્દુ, મુસ્લિમ, શીખ, ઘણા લોકો આવે છે. દર માટે કોઈ તકલીફ હોય માણસને, દાદાના શ્રદ્ધાના લીધે આવે અહીંયા. એમને જે મન્નત હોય, મન્નત રાખે, કોઈ તકલીફ હોય તે દાદા એમને પૂરી કરી દે છે.
આફ્રિકાથી લઈને આવ્યો હતો, તાંજાનિયા જંજીબારથી લઈને આવ્યા હતા. એના બાપુને એને બધાને લઈને આવ્યા હતા. અમારા દાદાના બાપુને બી લઈને આવ્યા હતા. પછી કહેતા ને ગુલામના કોણી, તો ગુલામના કોણી રાખ્યા હતા બધા એને. તો એ આપણા જામનગર રણજીત બાપુ હતા, એના બાપુ જામસા બાપુના બાપુ દાદા રણજીત, આજ કહે છે ને રણજીત તોફી, યા રણજીતસિંહજી, એ લઈને આવ્યા હતા. પછી બધા રજવાડામાં જ હતા અમે બધા ખાનદાન. આ જાંબુરમાં જુનાગઢના નવાબે જાંબુર બસાવ્યું, તો એ નવાબ લોકો લઈ આવ્યા હતા અફસી લોકોને. પછી ફેલાતા ગયા. હું તો સીધી હિન્દુસ્તાની પહેલે ને બાદમાં સીધી ભાષા. સીધી તો હિન્દુસ્તાની તો પહેલે જ ને. હવે તો અમે હિન્દુસ્તાની જ થઈ ગયા ને. હવે તો અમે મહારાષ્ટ્ર થઈ ગયા. કઈ ઝાલા રે કઈ ઝાલા.
મારા બચ્ચામાં જન્મ બધા થયો મહારાષ્ટ્રમાં, બધા બાપ દાદા બધા મહારાષ્ટ્રમાં, ત્રણ પેઢી મહારાષ્ટ્ર.
પહેલે હિન્દુસ્તાની પછી સીધી. પહેલે તો હિન્દુસ્તાની છે તો પછી મહારાષ્ટ્ર બાલ ઠાકરે કહે તુમી જાઓ તુમી ગાઓ મધી. નહીં તો કહેવાનું ને. હા અરે વાહ है ना महाराष्ट्र
तुम्हारा तो सब पुरखा के पुरखे इधर है, सवाल नहीं होता है.
બેય અમારે આવી જાય એટલે થોડીક અમારી પરંપરાની રીતે કરીએ અને અલગ સ્ટાઇલથી થોડીક કરીએ. અને જે બાવાગોરના ઉરસમાં કે બાવાગોર માટે કે બાવાગોરના છિલ્લામાં કરતા હોઈએ છીએ તે ધમાલ થોડીક અમારે અલગ પ્રકારની હોય છે. એ એક જાતનું જીકર છે. એટલે એ અમે બાવાને જીકર માટે થઈને, એને આહવાન, એને બોલાવવા માટે થઈને, એને ખુશી મનાવવા માટે થઈને કરીએ છીએ.
मस्ती धमाल करने से वो बिल्कुल वस्त हो जाता है, उसकी मस्ती आ जाती है. वो एक बुजुर्गों का सिलसिला है. उसमें क्या है कि पीर का बाबा गौर ने बीजे को 12 साल कब्र में इबादत करी तो उनका नाम बाबा गौर रखा गया. उनका सही नाम है सिदी मुबारक नोगी.
મને માય મિશ્રાની હાજરી આવે છે. માય મિશ્રા બાવાગોરના બહેન થાય. બાવાગોર 700 સાલ પહેલે આફ્રિકાથી આવ્યા હતા.
માય મિશ્રાનું આવે છે ને મને તો જાસ્તી જુમેરાત નથી, બહુ આવે છે મારા ઘર કે મેરી શાદી ને મેરી દુઆ કરકે દો. તો એ ટાઈમ તો કાંઈ ખબર નથી પડતું જબ હાજરી આવે છે. સિર્ફ દિમાગમાં કાંઈ કામ નથી કરતું. સૂર્ય છે કાંઈ 5 મિનિટ 10-15 મિનિટના લીધે પૂરું શાંત થઈ જાય છે. દિમાગ દિલમાં બધું શાંત થઈ જાય. પછી આવે છે તો પછી બાદમાં ખબર પડે છે કે હા કે હમણાં તમારે માય સાહેબની હાજરી આવી હતી. આમ એવા કેટલા આવે છે કે અમારા એ નહીં હો રહા હે, વો નહીં હો રહા હે. એક તરફથી એ લોકો મને બાવા મને બી બનાવીને રાખી દીધા છે.
कान पकड़े सब गुने धुल जाए. नीला के लाया, कान पकड़ के लाया मुर्शद के पास, और मुर्शद के जा उसके पास बैठ गया और पियाला पियाला तेरे सब गुने धुल गया. इतने जितने भी बचपन से लेके कि अभी तक में जो बनता है वहाँ तक के अंदर उसके सब गुने धुल जाते हैं. तो उसे बस
गरीब साहब की मस्तानी मांगो.
गरीब साहब की मस्तानी मांगो है. गरीब साहब की मस्तानी मांगो है. नाम बोलो सुनो तो जंगली साहब है. गरीब साहब के जंगली साहब है. गरीब साहब के जंगली साहब है.
ગુલાબ જેવી સિઝન, લગ્ન સરાની સિઝન હોય તો 100-150 રૂપિયા બી મળે. ઓફ સિઝન હોય તો 30-40 રૂપિયાનો ભાવ તો રહે. અમારો ગુજારો કરીએ છીએ, આવી મહેનત કરીને ગુજારો કરી લઈએ. બીજો ખાસ તો બિઝનેસ નથી. મુસીબત કરીને ભણી બી લઈએ તો ઇન્ટરવ્યૂ આપવા જઈએ. હું 3 વખત ઇન્ટરવ્યૂ આપવા ગયો પોલીસમાં. મારી પાસે 10,000 રૂપિયા મને માંગ્યા પણ હું ક્યાં લેવા જાઉં.
આવી ગયા ને પપ્પા
જીવનમાં એ બધું અનુભવ એ બધી ડિફિકલ્ટી જ છે.
નીચે ફૂટી
તને નથી આપતી એટલે ભણીએ તો આગળ જવાનો કોઈ રસ્તો માર્ગ નથી ને ભણવા માટે બી નીચલા ક્રમથી ઉપર જવા માટે બી પૈસો જ જોઈએ. એટલે મા બાપની આર્થિક પરિસ્થિતિ સારી હોય તો છોકરો ભણી શકે. મા બાપની જ આર્થિક પરિસ્થિતિ ખરાબ હોય છોકરોને કેવી રીતના ભણે? એ બધી સીધીના જીવનમાં ડિફિકલ્ટી જ છે.
ખાલી થઈ ગયું ને, ઘણા ચાલ્યા ગયા. અહીંયા ક્યાં છે ધંધો? ક્યાં છે? અહીંયા બહુ તો ગુરુવારે પબ્લિક આવે તો આવું બધું કરે. જંગલનો કામ અનુકૂળ આવતો નથી વધારે. પેલાના ટાઈમમાં કઈ જાણતા નતા તો લાકડા બી વેચીને ગુજારો કરતા હતા.
બરાબર ને?
પથ્થર પણ વેચીને ગુજાર કરતા હતા, પણ એમાં પણ કઈ ફાયદો નથી થતો. 25% છોકરા બહાર જ નોકરીઓ કરે છે. કોઈ ભાવનગર છે, કોઈ રતનપુર છે, કોઈ સુરત છે, કોઈ અમદાવાદ છે. ભાવનગર ડેલી સરે લક્ઝરી બસ આવું છું, પ્રાઇવેટ ટ્રાવેલ. અહીંયા ધંધો નહીં ને તો ક્યાં કરું છું? મહેનત કરી ને સવારે 5-6 વાગ્યાથી કામ કરું, રાત્રે 10 વાગ્યા સુધી. પગાર મળે છે 2200 રૂપિયા. એમાં પછી ઉપરના પેસેન્જર આવે, એમાંથી અમને 100-200 રૂપિયા ઘર ખર્ચું નીકળી જાય.
મારા પપ્પા હતા એ ગાતા હતા, અને મારા મોટા પપ્પા છે એ અમારી કલા જ ગાવાની હતી. પેશો છે ગાવાનો. કાયમી ધંધો કોઈનું નથી. એમ છૂટક મજૂરી મળી જાય. છોકરાઓ મારા બે બાબા છે, ભાઈઓ સાથે પ્રોગ્રામમાં જાય. અમારે કંઈ ઘરકામ કરવાનું હોય તો ઝાડુ બાસણ એવી રીતે મહિને પગાર તરીકે કરી લઈએ. કોઈ મચ્છીનું ધંધો કરી લે, કોઈ મંડપ બાંધી લે, કોઈ એમ ચાલુ કામ કરી લે બધા. ને મહિલાઓ બધા કામે જાય. હમણાં તો મોંઘવારી બહુ છે એટલે બહુ મુશ્કેલ છે ઘરમાં બધું સાચવવાનું. કોઈ મહેમાન આવી જાય એવી રીતે, કોઈ લગ્ન પ્રસંગ હોય તો થોડીક મુશ્કેલી આવી જાય. મહિને 1000-1500 હોય તો એ અમારું ઘર લાઇટ બધું જ અમારે કરવું પડે છે. લાઇટ બિલ હોય, ઘરવેરો હોય, ભાડું ભરવાનું હોય, એવી રીતે બધી પ્રશ્ન ઊભા થાય ને. ગ્રુપ છે ને 2-3 છોકરીઓ છે મારી સાથે, એટલે એ છોકરીઓ મારી સાથે આવે છે અવાજ આપવા. કોઈ પ્રસંગ લગ્ન હોય ને તો જવાનું. 500 નક્કી કરીએ. વળી ઘર જેવું હોય, સંબંધ જેવું હોય તો કહીએ કે ભાઈ 500 આપો કે 1000 આપો, એવી રીતે. ને અમારા જ જેવા કોઈ ગરીબ માણસ હોય તો પછી અમે કહીએ કે ભાઈ તમારી ખુશી પડે એમ તમે આપી દેજો.
મરહબા ઉંબાની માંગા કે લાય લાય લલ્લા बोलिया पीर मनाया. यानी क्या है कि अब ये जो आए तो उसके बाद उन्होंने अस्थि यहाँ सब फैलाया और ये इबादत की और ये आबाद किया. 125 जी करे करनी है. वो मरहूम कमर को कितना समझाया था मैंने कि देखिए है तो तुआ में कैसे तैयार करूं और उसके बाद लिख के किताब छप जाएगी तो बच्चे लोग याद करेंगे. हाँ, नहीं माना. आज इतना करा होता तो आज लोग तो याद करते. हमारे सीने में जो है हम मर जाएंगे साथ में चला जाएगा. अगर उसको ओपन रखेंगे तो बाद में रहता है ना.
आओ बाबा गोर चोखटे पधारो, चोखटे पधारो, सीधी करे धमाल, सीधी करे धमाल.
જીકર કાંઈ નોંધાય નહીં, એ તો કુદરતી બક્ષિસી હોય. અને ગીતની તો એક લાગણી હોય કે માને કે આ ગીત આપણે બોલવું જ છે અને આ ગીત એક નવે તરીકે બનાવવું જ છે એ. અને આ તો જીકર તો માયસામાં તરીકે એની પીરની બક્ષિસી છે. એ તો બસ અમારી પરંપરાની અંદર હરેક બચ્ચાને આવડતું જ હોય. ન આવડતું હોય તો અમારા જે વડીલ બોલતા હોય ને એ જીકર અમને આવડી જ જાય.
ડિફિકલ્ટી એ છે કે પરંપરા અમારે ચાલુ રાખવા માટે થઈને ઘણાને જોબ છે અને ઘણા મજૂર વર્ક પણ છે. એટલે જો એ એક વખત ડાન્સનું શરૂ કરી દે છે તો એ લોકોને એવું છે કે કામમાં મન નથી લાગતું. અને આ ડાન્સનું એવું છે, પ્રોગ્રામ તમને કાયમ મળતા નથી. અને ગવર્મેન્ટના જે અમુક પ્રોગ્રામ પહેલાં સ્ટાર્ટિંગમાં મળે એમાં તમને કોઈ જાતનું કંઈ આપવામાં ન આવે, ખાલી તમારે ખાવા પીવાની રહેવાની વ્યવસ્થા કરી આપે એ લોકો, અને તમને એક સ્ટેજ મળે છે ત્યારે છે. નોકરીમાં વારે વારે એ લોકો રજા લે તો એ ન પરવડે, અને જે મજૂરી કરતા હોય એ લોકોને રોજીરોટીનો સવાલ છે. જો એ 8 દિવસ ત્યાં પ્રોગ્રામ દેવા જાય તો અહીંયા ફેમિલીનું ગુજરાન કઈ રીતે ચલાવે? અમારી કોમ્યુનિટી માટે ઘણા બહારથી આવે જ છે. એ લોકો પત્રકારોને એ લોકો બધા આવે છે, પબ્લિશર આવે છે, એ લોકો બુક પર બહાર પાડે છે. તો અમને લોકોને ખબર નથી હોતી કે એ લોકો અમારી વિશે શું લખે છે અને કોને શું પૂછે છે. એટલે ગમે ત્યારે જેને જે પૂછે એ સહજતાથી ઘણી વખત બોલતા હોય છે. એ લોકો એટલું સિરિયસ નથી લેતા અમારે, કે સહજતાથી બોલતા હોય છે. આને કંઈક પૂછ્યું તો મને જે મનમાં આવ્યું એ ઘણી વખત કહી દે, અને ઘણા એવા પણ હોય છે કે જે ડીપમાં ઉતરીને પણ વિગત તમને કહી શકે છે. એટલે આ લોકો એવું ન વિચારે કે આણે કીધું એનો પૂરી કોમનો પ્રતિભાવ આ જ હશે. એટલે બધાનો અલગ અલગ રિવ્યૂ હોય છે. તો ઘણી વખત ઘણા એવું પણ પબ્લિશ કરે છે, તો અમને ઘણી વખત ગમતું પણ નથી કે ભાઈ અમારી જાણ બહાર તમે આખું એક સમાજનું વચ્ચે રાખીને, તમે જે વ્યક્તિને વચ્ચે રાખીને એ છાપો, આખો સમાજને વચ્ચે રાખીને ન છાપો.
घर से निकली हूँ सबको ये कह कर के मैं झोली ख्वाजा से आऊंगी भर कर के मैं। घर से निकली हूँ सबको ये कह कर के मैं झोली ख्वाजा से आऊंगी भर कर के मैं। कर दो ख्वाजा करम ओ कर दो ख्वाजा रख लो मेरा भरम। कर दो ख्वाजा करम रख लो मेरा भरम। ख्वाजा करम रख लो मेरा भरम, वरना किसी मुंह से मैं अपने घर जाऊंगी। कर दो ख्वाजा करम रख लो मेरा भरम, वरना किसी मुंह से मैं अपने
हमारे हाथ में इस तरह से आया है कि जो हमारे जो वडील थे बूढ़े बड़े, वो इसको बजाया करते थे कायम के लिए, और जो बाबा और दादा है वो भी इसको बजा के खुदा की बंदगी करते थे। इस वास्ते ये उनकी याददाश्त अभी हमारे पास में है।
मैं 12 साल के अंदर था जब मलूंगा सीखा बजाना। मेरे पिताजी थे तो वो ऐसे लेके बैठे, नाइट में लेके बैठे, सिखाते रहते थे 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, फिर उसके ऊपर से पीछे आगे बढ़ावे। क्या छिल्ला ढूंढकर छिल्ला ढूंढकर छिल्ला ढूंढकर, फिर बजा बोलो ये बोलते जाने का, मस्कल अंदर झूलेलाल मस्कल अंदर झूलेलाल, यानी उसके अंदर से मलूंगे के अंदर से भी आवाज़ निकलना चाहिए।
ये सैलानी, ये जो है ये लकड़ी इसको सैलानी बोलते हैं। ये मोर पींच इसको बोलते हैं, पींच, मोर का पींचा। इसके ऊपर गलेब चढ़ाया हुआ है, ये गलेब चढ़ाया हुआ है। क्या इसको बोलते हैं चाबुक। ये मिश्रा, तो यानी कि ये लाए बाद हम लोग को इसको तीन बल देने पड़ते हैं। 3 बल, ये हाथ में ऐसे छाले पड़ जाते हैं जब ये लकड़ी के ऊपर, मलुंगे के ऊपर ये ताज चढ़ती है।
हज़रत बिलाल का ये मलूंगा है। हज़रत बिलाल हबशी करते थे निस्बत कल्बी, हंस के चढ़े अजान को, देखी आन बान को, गिरते ही शहादत पाई यार से मिलने को। ये हज़रत बिलाल का, ये मलूंगा हज़रत बिलाल ने बनाया हुआ है। हम बिलाली कौम है तो बिलाल का वसीला हर घर पे सीधी के होना चाहिए, तो सीधी का घर माना जाएगा, नहीं तो कुछ ही नहीं।
कभी कभी ऐसा अठवाडिये 15 दिन के अंदर ध्यान लग जाता है, चला जाता है।
ऐसे हर गुरुवार
नहीं, हर गुरुवार को नहीं। अब तो अभी दादा पे रहता हूँ, पहले गदाई करता था मैं, चला जाता था 2-3 दिन के आंतरे। अब तो अभी ऐसा लगता है कि लाओ आज जाने का है, कभी किसी ने याद करा होता है कि तमें आवता नहीं बापू, तो फिर चला जाता हूँ। હમણે જે હું કરું છું તે ફકીરી જ છે મારી, ગોરીસાના નામ ઉપર, બાવાના નામ ઉપર ફકીરી જ કરું છું. બી ફકીરી સબરની ફકીરી છે બેન, એટલે હર દુઃખ બી સહન કરવા પડે, હર મુસીબત બી સહન કરવી પડે. અમુક ટાઈમે 2 ટાઈમ બી ખાવાનું ના મળે, એટલું એ સહન કરવું પડે, આપણે દિલને મારવું પડે, તો એ ફકીરી ગણાય. એ રે અન પાણી તારા ગળે ન ઉતરે ભાઈ, પાણી એ તારા ગળે ન ઉતરે ને. અહીંયા શું છે કે બાગોરના નામનું 10 શેર 5 શેર અનાજ જે લોકો નવી ખેતી થાય ત્યારે 5 શેર 10 શેર અનાજ કાઢે, તે પાછા આપણને બોલાવીને ત્યાં આપે કે ભાઈ આ બાગોરના નામનું છે, તમે લઈ જાઓ. सबको यानी खबर है कि ये बाबा दादा का ही बाजा है. गुजराती लोगों को भी खबर है, ये जो नहीं ऐसे करके झाड़ा नाक देते हम लोग, उन लोगों को खबर क्या ये बाबा का बाजा है, इससे अपने झाड़ा नखवाएंगे, अपनी तबीयत अच्छी हो जाएगी. गुजराती में जाता हूँ, गुजराती जैसा. मुसलमान में जाता हूँ, मुसलमान जैसा. हाँ, उनके अंदर भजन गा लेता हूँ. गुजराती है, हमारे वाले हैं, मुसलमान हैं, यानी हर कौम के अंदर मैं चला जाता हूँ. सलामत रही
आज यूँ समझो ने कि गोरी सुल्तान को 8000 बरस होते हैं आने को हिंदुस्तान के अंदर. 8000 बरस से परंपरा चली है, फ़कीरी, मुरीदी और सेवाएं गुलामी की. हमको क्या बोलते हैं, बाग और के धम्बाली, और छोकरियों को बाग बोलते हैं माई साहब की सहेलियाँ. तो हम धमाली है गोरी सुल्तान के, उनके गुलामों के गुलाम हैं.
सब मेरे पीर को पीरान पीर कहते हैं और दुनिया वाले उन्हें रब्बे कदीर कहते हैं. ऐ अल्लाह के बंदो और उम्मत रसूल, ये वास्ते अल्लाह का सौदा है, अल्लाह ने दिया है तो वास्ते अल्लाह. फी शफीउल्लाह, या मेरे मौला कर सबका भला.
वो सीना वटो तो अंबानी, तू इतना बड़ा, अल्लाह ने तेरे को मकान दिया है, सब कुछ दिया, पर तेरा हाथ ऐसा वास्ते अल्लाह लंबा नहीं होता. दे
सीना वटो तो अंबानी, मदद गोरी बाबा अंबानी. तेरा अल्लाह बेलिया, तेरा नदी बेलियां ओसीना वटो टोम्बानी। उस टाइम पर हमारे दादा परदादा सोहेली भाषा अच्छी तरह से जानते थे। जैसे कि हमारे अंदर गादी वारस जुम्मा मियाँ अब बबानी या कोरी यानी क्या है बादशाह तू क्या करता है क्यों आया है हम आए तेरे वास्ते। ऐसी वो सोहेली भाषा बहुत अलग अलग जात की अलग अलग टाइप की।
गोरी सा पिया मेरे पिया मेरी तरफ तो देखना और तुम हो मेरे में आब का मेरी तरफ तो देखना। तेरा दरबार सहाना तो मैं भी दर पे आया हूँ मिले छोटा सा पैमाना तो मैं भी दर पे आया हूँ। तेरे दर से मैं खाली अगर जाऊंगा ताने देगा जमाना जिधर जाऊंगा भीख देगा तो इस दर से घर जाऊंगा वरना के चौकट पे मर जाऊंगा। है मेरे लब पर तराना है मेरे लब पर तराना पीरू बाबा गोर का है मेरे लब पर तराना पीरू बाबा।
आज जुमेरात है, जुमेरात और रविवार के दिन यहाँ पे ये दुकान लगाते हैं और ये धंधा पानी करते हैं। उससे मालिक थोड़ा बहुत दे देता है हमको, उससे हमारा गुजरान चलता है। फिर और दूसरी मेहनत मजदूरी कर लेते हैं, उससे गुजरान चलता है। इधर बाबा गोर के ऊपर कोई आने जाने वाला वो कुछ न कुछ दे जाता है, उससे यानी हमारा पोषण अच्छे से अच्छा होता है। क्या 2 लड़के हैं वो मेहनत मजदूरी करते हैं, प्रोग्राम में जाते हैं आते हैं, वो थोड़ा बहुत मदद करते हैं और ये अपना अपना मैं खुद कर लेता हूँ।
हे मेरे लपर तराना पीर बाबा गोर का है मेरे लपर तराना पीर बाबा गोर का। ये मरहबा दरबार क्या है पीर बाबा गोर का।
મારા પપ્પા એમ તો દાદાનું બાવળ દાદાને ધમાલનું કામ કરતા હતા, એમાં જીકરે ઇલાઈ છે ને કે બોલતા હતા. બીજું એમની પાસે કવ્વાલીનું ફન હતું, એ કવ્વાલી અહીં દાદામાં ગાતા હતા.
તો એ કામ તમે કેમ નહીં ઉપાડ્યું?
એ કામ ઉપાડું પણ હવે એક હાથે બધું કામ કરવાનું એટલે પહોંચી નથી વળાતું. દુકાન કરવા જાઉં તો એ બંધ રહે છે ને એ કરું તો પછી દુકાન બંધ રહે.
તો દુકાનમાં તમને વધારે ફાયદો થાય છે?
ના એમ ચાલ્યા કરે છે આપણું રોલેશન, બાકી બે કામ પહોંચી નથી વળાતું.
कोई अब कोई बजाते नहीं, कोई जवाने पार्टी हो गए, सब कमाते धमाते हो गए, कोई ड्राइवर हो गया, कोई क्या हो गया, कोई क्या हो गया। कौन ये चीज़ को पसंद करेगा? अभी मैं हूँ, मेरा बच्चा पसंद करेगा, मेरा छोकरा भी आया था रिक्शा लेके, पसंद करेगा कि अब्बा के संगात जाओ, चल बेटा। तो गए, मेरे को शर्म आती, इसको क्या, ये तो छोटा है तो संगात आया, ये जवान हो जाएगा तो ये भी नहीं आएगा, ये सिलसिला सब बंद हो जाएगा।
क्या बरोबर पकड़ नहीं गया? हाथ में जोड़ है क्या नहीं तेरे? खुला आवाज निकलना चाहिए।
ના ભણતા તો કરાવવાનું, પણ આ થોડુંક આ બી દિમાગમાં થોડુંક હોય તો ગમે તારે કરી શકે. બાકી ભણતર તો આજના ટાઈમે બહુ જરૂરી છે.
બચ્ચાઓને શીખવું તો છું હવે એમને જો દિલમાં ઉમંગ હશે તો આગળ જઈને એ પણ મારી રીતે કરી શકશે.
मुस्कुराता मदीने से वो देखिए काशी देख खिरामा गया झूमता मुस्कुराता मदीने से वो देखिए काशी देख खिरामा.
One moment. Thank you so much, Beheroze, for entrusting me to share your screening, Voice of the Sidis, your compilation. And I'm so pleased to be in discussion with you, Beheroze and Jazmin. So we can go ahead and transition to our discussion. So first, before I even start, I'd like to give actually just applause for Beheroze G's marvelous, really important work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so to start off, this question for both Beheroze G and Jazmin. What is the, I mean, these are some questions that have been percolating for us, but also are very much connected to the reading. So what does the African diaspora in the Indian Ocean world look like? How would you define it?
Jazmin can go first.
Thank you, Beheroze G. Thank you again also for that wonderful film compilation. It's every time I see it, it's like I'm seeing it again for the first time. So the African diaspora in India is something that's very multi-layered and very multifaceted. So it's something that is, as we'll discuss later on in our conversation, is both tangible in terms of materiality, material media that are identifiable as part of this heritage, and intangible. So I know that we'll go into that a little bit more deeply, but one entryway or entry point into studying the African diaspora in India is through the material culture of Indians of African ancestry. And broader, this connects us to the African diaspora and the larger Indian Ocean world. So one thing that I've looked at is other instruments like the nangas, which is now obsolete, but is housed ceremonially in a memorial shrine of Baba Gaur in Mumbai, as Beheroze G has written about. And these particular instruments connect those Sidis who house them with other peoples of African descent who have been dispersed throughout the Indian Ocean world, who also have these instruments and who use these instruments in their ritual traditions, whether in Sudan or Ethiopia or in Iran or the UAE. So in that way, one way to approach the African diaspora in the Indian Ocean world is to look at the material culture of this diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jazmin. I also want to refer all of you to Professor Alper's essay, which we have appended to our lecture today. And that is to look at the wide dispersal of Africans who have come in as traders, merchants, and in other professions. And even Professor Shihan de Silva Jayasuriya, in her volume with Richard Pankhurst, has Professor Alper's essay on the dispersal of Africans in the Indian Ocean, where it's not just Sidis in South Asia, but the spread of Africans in whether it's Mauritius, it's Seychelles, and different, Sri Lanka, of course, with Professor Shihan de Silva Jayasuriya's research. So diaspora then also takes on different meanings for people who have been dispersed and dislocated. And in that sense, can we use the word diaspora? And if so, we may have to redefine it in many ways, because diaspora, and as Professor Alpers has also suggested, has many connotations, and it has been used by William Safran, the scholar who has talked about the Jewish diaspora. And the ties to the homeland are importantly emphasized by the Jewish dispersal across the world. But for Africans and their dispersal, there are different meanings for Africans located in different regions of the Indian Ocean. And maybe for Sidis, the imaginative, mythopoetic connection to Baba Gor is their memory of Africa. So it's merely a mythopoetic memory. And their way of claiming an ancestry to the elite military soldiers who were brought to the subcontinent in the early modern, pre-modern period. So a good look at Professor Alpers' essay will give us the spread of Africans brought to the Indian Ocean world. And then if we are again to look at diaspora, Sophia Pequeno has, Jazmin has of course written a very good essay on the lyre, and she traces the movement of Africans along from Ethiopia down the west coast and then via the Gulf to India through instruments. But Sophia Pequeno is also looking at how there is an awakening of diasporic consciousness in the contemporary communities after social media has taken over in the younger generation. There is an exchange of information on WhatsApp and Facebook, and Sidis are connecting from Karnataka to Gujarat and to Sri Lanka, and also they are connecting globally. So they are also looking for a Pan-African identity. So diaspora is a word that can be redefined in many ways when we look at the African dispersal in the Indian Ocean. And perhaps Professor Alpers, Professor Srihan de Silva may like to jump in also, or Professor Sheila Walker, who has documented the dispersal of Africans in Latin America in the Latinx context.
How can I pass up an opening like that? Thank you very much. I agree with Jazmin. It was wonderful to see your film. Actually, I hadn't seen all of them, but it was wonderful to see that again, to see Kamar Bradshaw, who I did meet all these years ago. But also there's some wonderful moments in there. I thought the reference to Thackeray was hysterical. I mean, and also tells you a lot about race relations in contemporary India. And then I thought also the point that the woman the very articulate woman who works in the bank made about really the ethics of research and representing the community. That's a powerful, powerful statement that that needs to be reiterated whenever it can. Just to pick up one point that Jazmin makes, the seeing the whole explanation of putting together a malunga. I've seen that done in Reunion with the bora, and you could go to Brazil and see the same thing as well. So that's a particular instrument that has is used across parts of the global African diaspora. It's and it's interesting to think about it. It's not the most entrancing instrument in its musicality. It doesn't provide the same kind of rhythm because it's not very loud. The drumming does, and yet but I think it's very simplicity, and it's the ability to replicate it it's interesting that it's, you know, you can go from Brazil to Reunion to India to see it, and it's very powerful in that way. One thing that, just listening to what Beheroze was saying, one of the interesting aspects of the African diaspora in India and the presence of Africans in India is that it's got a great deal of depth historically. I thought it was interesting, however, that that one couple pointed out, they were making the point where we've been in Maharashtra for 3 generations, that some of the memory, although we know that Africans were present back at least to the 13th century, if not sooner, that most of the Sidis are actually representative of, let's say, the late 18th and 19th century diaspora of Africans across the Western Indian Ocean. It's not that, despite, you know, all the talk about the Anj revolt in Iraq, it's not a deep time period. But it's interesting that the memory that's built around Bavagor speaks to a much deeper history. Whereas in a place like Mauritius or among the Makua in Western Madagascar, for example, there's a sense of that because they know that their ancestors were brought over as a result of the 19th century slave trade. So there's some, you know, so it's really interesting to see these kinds of contrasts. You could actually say the same thing in the Gulf too, because there were clearly Africans in the particularly the Arabian side, going back quite a bit. The majority were brought in as coconut and date plantations were developed in the late 18th and 19th century. So there are lots of ways in which you can approach this, and so I'm delighted that the organizers have taken the initiative to look at the Black diaspora in the Indian Ocean in a serious manner.
Yeah, thank you. Hiba?
Yeah, thank you for those very generous answers, because as Beheroze said, that there are these particularities, and as well as Alpers and Jazmin have stated that the way to think about the African diaspora in the Indian Ocean world is through culture and through the conception of the material culture. And that brings me very lovingly to our next question for you both. Anyone else would like to add is, how do you define this term intangible heritage, which is very much related to material culture that Jazmin mentioned earlier? How do you define that term intangible heritage, and what are the social and economic factors that facilitate intangible heritage?
Yeah. Jazmin, would you like to go first?
Okay, we can keep that order.
Yeah.
So Shihan De Silva Jayasuriya writes about the intangible heritage of Afro-Diasporian communities in South Asia in the volume that just came out, Afro South Asia and the Global African Diaspora. It's available on Amazon and it's in 3 volumes. And so intangible heritage, I look at it as those aspects of culture and identity that reflect back on African origins or African heritage. So we can think about the musical traditions, as Beheroze has pointed out in her documentary, the Dhamal or Goma dance, and that dance in particular as an ecstatic form of ecstatic dance that leads to trance, that leads to mediumship of ancestral saints. These are patterns of devotional practice that are reflected elsewhere in the African diaspora. And so these are aspects of intangible yet embodied heritage, embodying the sort of cultural information, such as these knowledge of ancestral saints from Africa, et cetera, and performing that embodiment through the act of mediumship. So these are some ways to look at the intangible heritage of people of African descent in the Indian Ocean world.
Yeah, and I'd like to build on that Professor Shihan De Silva Jayasuriya had a conference in August, on intangible cultural heritage. And she's also putting a volume together. Shihan, if you would like to jump in at any time, please feel free to do so. And I've also defined intangible cultural heritage in terms of the jikar, or the songs that are sung in honor of Baba Gaur during the Damal, and that in the film, Jumma Bacha says, you know, I would like to note them down. I would like to write them down. And it's contested by another woman who has composed her own song about Baba Gaur, and she says, no, you can't write jikars down. It is oral tradition. You just have to pass it from one generation to another. Luckily, Professor Amy Catlin has recorded the jikars, and Rumana Ben has sung them. Rumana Ben is a Sidi, respected Sidi matriarch in Ahmedabad, with whom Jazmin has also worked very closely. So these somewhere, these intangible heritages and intangible cultures, like the jikar, the sacred songs to Baba Gaur, and even the qawwalis that the Siddhis sing, which are devotional songs to Sufi saints, but the Siddhis put Baba Gaur's name in place of a Sufi saint like Khwaja Mohinuddin Chishti. So even those are precious because they have changed the words and altered the words in many different ways. Then another way in which we can look at intangible heritage is the spiritual healing power that emanates from the shrine. That was appropriated by another community. The shrine was appropriated by another community, and Helena Basu, one of the foundational scholars of Siddhi scholarship, has written about it in the volume that Professor Alpers and Amy Catlin Jarazbai put together called Siddhis and Scholars. And she talks about that. And only recently the Siddhis have gained, that's right, Professor Alpers just held up the volume Siddhis and Scholars, and Helena Basu has this essay in which the shrine was appropriated by another community. So that deprived the Siddhis of their intangible heritage. And only now they have been, after fighting a legal case for years together, I should say decades, they finally are in possession of the shrine and are sitting in the office from where they can make decisions about how to run the shrine for Siddhis also, and then other devotees. So intangible heritage works in many ways. And Professor Shihan de Silva, if you would like to jump in and make any comments, I think that would be very nice. Maybe not. But another point that I want to make that about diasporic consciousness that Professor Shihan de Silva makes is that in Sri Lanka, the Siddhis, not the Siddhis, they do call them, some of them do call themselves Siddhis, Afro-descended people also had very few memories as such of Africa. But when the ambassador from South Africa visited Sri Lanka and met with the people and saw Shihan de Silva Jayasuriya's film, she created this bond with the people, and she took many of them to South Africa from Sri Lanka. So Professor Shihan de Silva says that when they reached South Africa, they touched the ground and kissed it. And so now they have acquired a different kind of consciousness about who they are as African descended people. And they are beginning to transform their sense of identity by singing songs like Malaika, which are very popular in Africa and not so popular in Sri Lanka, I guess. And they also have begun to dress differently to espouse a much more African identity. So it's interesting to look at intangible cultural heritage, to look at diasporic consciousness. And I guess Professor Silva doesn't want to make any comments, but that's all right.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight the part about the social and economic factors of the one that you highlight just earlier, Beheroze, about how how the shrine was dispossessed by a different group, and then only recently came back under the purview of the Sidi community in Gujarat. And the other aspect that you also highlight in your film as well about the tradition of fakirs, of not being such a viable financial option, and how that impacts the ways in which Malunga, the practice of playing the Malunga, is or is not passed down. So if you could kind of just wait a little bit in on that aspect and the passing down of the intangible cultural heritage.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the Malunga, Professor Amy Catlin Jarasbay held this wonderful camp and a workshop where the Malungas were made and passed out to different families, and people were taught how to actually play. And the lyre, the Nubian lyre, that is housed in one of the Sidi shrines is no longer played. Nobody knows how to play it. No strings are available. So at least the Malunga is available and can be played. And in the film, Iqbal, Qamar Badshah's son, is teaching his own son how to play. But again, it's the Sidis of the younger generation don't seem very interested in playing the Malunga, and they do not want to attach themselves to this tradition of going into a neighborhood and singing as itinerant musicians. They see themselves now connected to a modernized and globalized world. And India, is presenting its image of a very globalized country, especially with the neoliberal economy in India. Younger people are seeing television shows, and they're seeing all kinds of documentaries about how people are changing their lives, etc. So the passing on of this tradition has become a problematic area. And the elders, the two men who played and are the expert players, have both passed away. Iqbal is still there, and he is now the Gadiwaras, the Mujawar, the caretaker of the shrine, and the head musician, poet of the community. But there is only so much he can do. There are many ceremonies and many rituals at the shrine he has to take care of. So how will they pass on this cultural heritage? The Goma Damal dance is there to stay, because people are still calling on Siddhis to perform. The women sing Garba, and one of the Siddhi women was singing a Garba, which is a Gujarati folk dance actually, and a folk song during Navaratri, the 9 days before Diwali. The Siddhis have adapted it. The women sing it as a Garba or Garbis to Mai Mishra. Now, those women go in groups and sing in different places. But today, people prefer DJ music or Bollywood music to Garbas, to Mai Mishra, or even Goma Dhamal dance. DJs have become much more popular, including in the community itself. In the Siddhi community in Jambur, for example, there was a wedding and the DJ was playing Bollywood music. So these are dilemmas, contradictions, and questions in terms of tangible, intangible heritage. And those are very good questions, Hiba.
Just as a comment, what you're describing is obviously true, but it's true everywhere. And I think it's important to remember, because of right here our focus on Sidis and the maintenance of their heritage, that what you're describing is a universal phenomenon. You can see this. I've done a piece which is probably pretty difficult to come. It's in another book that I've co-edited last year in Mauritius with Vijaya Tilak and another colleague, and talking about the musical heritages. It's called When Diasporas Meet, because in Mauritius you have both African and Malagasy and Indian and French, Franco-European things. And so that, and by the time you get to modern Sega, the kind of the national dance, which is has African origins, but when time you get to it, you now have Indian instruments being integrated into Sega. You have different tunes, so it goes in both directions. I think one of the problems that faces Sidis is that in the context of India, there's such a small minority that the possibility of their traditions getting lost is greater than even in a place like Mauritius, where the Indian population is basically 2/3 of the population, and so that people of African descent, Afro-Malagasy descent, are in a distinct minority, or Makua, people of Bantu descent in Western Madagascar, where the overwhelming majority are Malagasy. So demographics is a real factor here in the maintenance of this. The other thing I just has occurred to me in listening to this once again is I felt for a long time, anthropologists talk about being participant observers, but I think there's also a sense that has to do with the discovery of African roots among African diaspora communities in the Indian Ocean world, that scholars have been a precipitant. That the fact that people like us have come in and asked questions that seem fairly obvious to us, but not necessarily to the actual communities, has made some people think about that one or another. And the best example I can think of is the last time I was in Maputo a couple of years ago. Actually, this is 2017, so it was for a conference. And two of the people there were Makua from Durban, from South Africa. Now, there was a group of enslaved Africans who were freed, quote, freed, liberated by British anti-slavery patrols, and they became known as Zanzibar Africans because of this connection to the slave trade. They weren't actually Zanzibaris. Most of them were Makua, who were enslaved northern Mozambicans. But because Preben Carlsholm, who is kind of the guiding force for an Indian Ocean, the European group of Indian Oceanists at Rothschild University, he'd been doing work on Makua in South Africa. And these folks were now coming up. They actually have maintained certain traditions, but nobody speaks Makua. So they were coming up to meet people and see if they could learn. It's like the one time I was at the Bavagor Shrine, somebody asked me if I could send him a Swahili dictionary or a Swahili grammar, which I did. It went out. I never heard back. But so there's a kind of a yearning that was probably there, not articulated. People come along and say, "Oh yeah, you're Makua. Aren't you from northern Mozambique?" And now there is an actual connection. There's a couple of very interesting people, sort of in their, I would say, in their 50s, who are connected to that community and who've now made connections with people in Maputo and hopefully eventually up in Nampula district too.
That's immensely fascinating, the ways in which culture is transmitted, and it's not always made visible, and has to go through this process of being made visible, or to have called it out for that to be more towards the surface. Jazmin, is there anything you'd like to add? I know you shared something in the chat.
Oh yes, actually, Dr. Alpers, your point about this yearning to reconnect with sort of ancestral language, ancestral culture through learning Swahili, it ties back into this conversation of the intangible heritage of the community. And in Beheroze Shroff's documentary that we saw, there was one Malunga player who spoke about how when mediating the energies of Bavagor, the individual will speak Swahili. So whether, and he talks about how there are different dialects of Swahili that are preserved amongst Sidis in some respects. And even one of the songs that he was singing as he was playing the malunga preserves some Swahili phrases. So these are some aspects of the culture that survive. For how long they will survive past 2021 is yet to be determined.
My guess is that some of that was some Swahili, not all of it, but some Swahili may have come through much more recently.
Yeah.
So people would know how to say Habari Gani or Hakuna Matata.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see people I had met with Beheroze. And I felt very fortunate to have gotten to be in India with Beheroze and to go to Ratampur, to that shrine of Bavagor. And one of the things that I am interested in is the way that some African cultures have traveled both east and west. Like, and the most obvious to me is the term ngoma for drum that is used in India, and that is used in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil among the Congos or in the Congadas. And I show, and on the malunga and the birimbau, I showed an image of the malunga to an Afro-Brazilian birimbau player, and he said, oh, well, it's almost the same, but it's a different wood. But in Minas Gerais, I showed the same juxtaposition of an Afro-Brazilian playing the birimbau and a member of Sidi Goma, whom we saw in Goa, playing the malunga. I showed this to a group of Afro-Brazilians in Belo Horizonte in the state of Minas Gerais, so inland state. And one Afro-Brazilian said, oh, I know that guy. And I said, you know who? He said, I know that guy who's playing the birimbau, the malunga. I said, how do you know him? He said, oh, we played together. Where? Chennai. So these Afro-Brazilians had gone as a performance group to India and had met Sidi Goma. And I wonder what kinds of, interactions happen there. I don't know.
Yes, very interesting indeed. And in fact, I also wanted to point out, which I think Professor Alpers has quoted in one of his essays, Professor Al Roberts and his wife, Polly Neuter Roberts, had gone on a crossing borders program with students to Hyderabad. And they were witnessing a dance performance by the community there, who also called themselves Chosh. They don't go by Sidi, they call themselves Chosh. And they were performing this song. And one of the students in the group from United States with Professor Al Roberts and his wife sang the song. And she knew the song from one of the countries in Africa. I can't remember. Perhaps Ned will remember. And they were all in shock. Like, this woman knows the song, and then she taught them all the words of the song. So, the kind of exchanges, the cultural exchanges that have taken place in with scholarship and the intervention of scholars has been quite amazing also. Just wanted to make that comment.
So we're having such a, sorry, what?
I said the wrong word, where the Afro-Brazilian met the guy from Sidi Goma. It was Kolkata.
Kolkata.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're having such a lovely discussion. Thank you, Dr. Sheila and Annette Alpers, for being a part of our discussion. I really appreciate it. So within our last 5-10 minutes, I'd like to turn it over to the audience. There's a few questions that have already come through in the chat. So Gurpreet, would you like to come on and just ask your question out loud? Would that be easier, you can let me know in the chat. And we can move on to Geeta's question. It says, how has the political situation affected the transfer of memory and a desire of younger generation to continue the lineage?
Sorry, say that again. Read that again.
Oh, yes. How has the political situation affected the transfer of memory and a desire of younger generation to continue the lineage?
I'm actually asking this for a specific reason, which is that, you know, the standard practice in much of Gujarat used to be for Hindu and Muslim communities. When a child was 40, I think this is, Beheroze and I talked about this years and years ago, right? When you first started doing the work, and I bought your films for Wellesley. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But when a child is at 40 days, right, it's the first time the child leaves the household. And the first place they go to is a Sufi shrine. And some of those shrines were Siddhi shrines. And that's beginning to change, you know, because of the way in which the political has actually transformed what Sufi shrines stand for, right? So I think younger generations, I've you know, just look Sufi shrines in different places, like for younger generations. For example, when I was in India, there were a couple of Sufi shrines in Delhi that the police were trying to shut down, right? Last year during all the stuff that was going on in Delhi. So I'm just curious to sort of have you think about it, because that's where intangible heritage leaves, right? It's really embedded in a kind of practice that's not just of the Siddhi community, but the way in which other communities, and this is what your film speaks to so effectively, Beheroze,
Yeah,
you know, other communities and engagement in that collective remembering.
Yeah, thank you, Geeta. That's really a very interesting question, given the contemporary climate in India at present. And just let me give another example of what happened in Maharashtra when the riots broke out after the mosque in Ayodhya, the mosque built by the Mughal Emperor Babur, called the Babri Mosque, was brought down, exploded and brought down, and there were riots in Bombay. There was a shrine, there is still the shrine in Mumbai, called Kamlisha Baba near Kirti College. And Hindus go there. In fact, one of the leaders of the Shiv Sena used to go there, according to the Mujawar. So during the riots, the shrine was left undisturbed. But that was the 1990s. And times have changed. India has gone even more right wing, and the whole concept of Hindutva is being emphasized. Now, the original shrine of Baba Gaur in Bharuch, in Ratanpur, still draws many Hindu devotees who really rely on the shrine, who give big donations. So I know that it was also unharmed during the riots, Godhra riots in 2002 in Gujarat. They were unharmed, but smaller roadside shrines were desecrated, Muslim shrines.
Yeah.
So I don't know lately if there has been, and yes, during the Godhra riots, I spoke to Rumana Ben in Ahmedabad, who is one of the elders of the community there, and she said we were afraid because we are in the heart of the city. But we had police inspectors who were respectful of us and alerted us and told us not to step out, or brought us supplies and things. But not every Siddhi home was that lucky. They were under a lot of tension. So but I don't know if in this climate any of the Siddhi shrines have been threatened in Gujarat. In Delhi, what you have pointed out, I was not aware of. But in Gujarat, there has not been, to my knowledge, only a few months ago in Talala, in Jambur, a few Siddhis were beaten very brutally. And that was during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. But we don't know what provoked it, except that the owner of the restaurant where they worked as, you know, backroom help, dishwashers and whatever, said there was some problem with them bringing fish and not charging the right amount or whatever, but they were brutally beaten, and it was on video, and the video went viral. So somebody sent it to me. Now, that is the only incident I know of. But Jazmin, I don't know if you know of any other incident during this time.
There was another incident like this several months ago in Rajkot, where a Siddhi man was beaten by a mob of Hindus. But I don't know any more details about it other than that. There, Siddhis did mobilize after this incident and protested about it. There was some newspaper coverage of it in the Gujarati newspapers, but otherwise I don't know of any more details about why. So it's unclear whether the tensions are racialized, but it's definitely certain that the tensions are because these particular Siddhis in Gujarat are Muslim.
Yeah, because in Delhi, it's a combination. It's religion and racialization, right? And Delhi has a major issue with racialization, you know, because I have friends who came from Ethiopia and couldn't get hotel rooms at some point, right? So Delhi's, but also I was thinking about the question that what you have raised about the continuation of memory in the next generation, right? When you're living post Godhra, post Babri Masjid, when younger generations are living with that, what they see, right, around them. I mean, I know what it's like to do the kind of work I do on Sufism and Islam. I mean, I know that I'm under threat, right? So if you're, and I'm willing to live with that, but I understand, and like if you have a choice of just disappearing into a job in a bank, right, and not continuing the tradition, becoming unmarked in some ways, and are you willing to hold on to the tangible things that make intangible, you know, cultural property possible? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I must say, when you mention the woman who worked in the bank and working in the bank, she is from Bhavnagar, a district, an area in Gujarat, and her family is connected to the Maharaja of Bhavnagar, and her great grandfather worked for the Maharaja of Bhavnagar, Krishna Kumar Singh Ji. So even as she works in the bank and she is modernized, her ties to history and memory are unshakable. And she has done everything possible to keep the memory alive of her great grandfather and grandfather, who also worked for the subsequent Maharaja of Bhavnagar and was personal secretary because he was an educated man, unlike the great grandfather, who was more a person who rose in the ranks from chokidar to treasurer. So it's very interesting in terms of memory, what that means for the younger generation. And in fact, again, to give you an idea of how memory can be redefined and transformed, I go back to Sophia Pequeno's essay on the Siddhis of Karnataka in our volume that Jazmin, Omar Ali, Ken Robbins, and I have co-edited. And she talks about a young 26-year-old Siddhi from Uttara Kannada. His name is Nagaraj, and he is English speaking. He's very educated. And he has set up a group. I think it's a group on WhatsApp. And he says, and this is, I'm quoting from the article, He says, I want to make sure that in our country, we are not Africans. We were born in India. You can see the whole precarious nature of identity and the question of identity. And then he says, I want to identify, we are saying Indian, but I thought let's make our unity of Sidi a term, because whatever talents we have, we share, we should do something for our society. We Africans are good at sports, good at work, good at everything. The only thing we don't have is support. I have heard in the USA, Black people worked for big companies and made those big companies in a top list, etc., etc. So he is talking, the two are not mutually exclusive, of being Indian and being proud of being African in terms of, you know, his skin color, his hair, etc. So I think this double consciousness, if we can bring in Du Bois and think about that, and I don't know, it seems they are also getting more politicized in terms of their racialized identity. So yeah, I think your question, yeah.
I'd like to, oh, go. I think Jazmin has one point to add, and then we'll close close the event because we're getting near our time that we have our closed caption.
Thank you for that.
I want to, maybe we can do one more question after Jazmin.
Oh, we're getting
some
closer
questions from the audience
to 8:30, so I just wanted to be mindful of the time I've set up the closed caption. So I think after Jazmin's comment, I'll go ahead and close the event.
I guess the lively discussion is just a testament to how engaging this material is and how excellent of an event this is to put on, Hiba. So thank you for this event. One thing I just like to follow up with Gita and just say that although we have seen some challenges with preserving certain aspects of Sidi's heritage and culture, given the economic constraints that Sidis find themselves in, we also see a sure continuity of various aspects of their culture. So the tradition that you mentioned of after 40 days, a new mother and her newborn go to the shrine and make offerings, that's something that's still very much alive in the city of Ahmedabad, amongst these.
That's great.
Well, I want to thank everyone who has participated in our discussion. Especially big love to Beheroze and Jazmin and Tuli and Savik as well, and for all the interlocutors, including Dr. Sheila Walker, who we'll be working with next month, as well as Edward Alpers and everyone else who I'm kind of failing to mention right now. So I really appreciate everyone coming to our event. We will be sharing up a version of this recording in the coming week or so, and we will see you next time. I don't know, Tuli, if you want to add anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Sheila, Hiba, Jazmin. Thank you. And thank you, Gita, for being here.
No, it's been great.
Thank you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Gita. Take care, everyone. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.